think you guys probably got a pop up, but all right, Doug, I will let you take it away. Go ahead and tell us just a little bit about yourself and why you're qualified to be here, because you are.
One of my favorite lines is, "Nah, I'm just some guy." But my name is Doug Babcock, and I am a lifelong public safety professional. I started my emergency medical technician class when I was 16 years old. I started it when I was growing up in New Jersey. Trust me, I got out as quick as I could, but that's where I grew up. And I was started my EMT class at 16. I was certified at 17. I had a 25-year career as an EMT. I worked in multiple states. I was nationally registered. I was an EMT for the U.S. Coast Guard when I was enlisted for 4 years. I was an advanced EMT in multiple states where they, do IVs and advanced airways and stuff. I also was on a critical care transport team, worked out of emergency rooms, and was even I'm just going to claim that this was fun. I'm not going to claim any glory or righteousness to it, but I even got a ride along flight with a helicopter crew, and so I've been in and out of emergency medicine in almost every facet for 25 years. I was certified until 2016 when I retired. And I was, at the time, I'd been with Essex Rescue for about 15 years, running 911 service with them. I've also been a firefighter, police officer. I was an assistant medical examiner. I was a lab phlebotomist. I've been around just a ton of emergency medicine, emergencies, and things. And so I've even though I'm no longer certified as an EMT and I'm no longer currently running as a first responder, I'm still fairly close enough that I know some other basic some things. The other thing I'll add is that I was actually a SWAT medic for 4 or 5 years as well. So, making holes, patching holes, keeping people alive, all the paperwork that comes with either side of that equation. I've done a fair amount of it either way.
That's awesome. Okay, so I think the biggest question that was asked from this side of things, just to kind of kick things off, is like, which kit should I get? Do I need all the bells and whistles? And I think that that's probably everybody's like first question when it comes to first aid kit is like, which one? So I know you've got some kits behind you. Do you just want to talk about, what you would include in a first aid kit? What do you think is important and all that? Or did you have an agenda? I'm open to anything. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's actually the question I anticipated, and so I have I have two different variations of kits behind me, and they're for very specific purposes. So I'll just wander through both of them. Um, this one, my orange kit. Uh, I'm gonna use a phrase that I very rarely use because I try not to do this too much, but this first aid kit is older than you. I got this when I was 18 and working on Linden State Rescue, and I was a first responder, and I was actively using my personal vehicle to jump calls, and as a member of the ambulance crew, the squad that I was on, and so it's kind of big. It's got a bunch of pockets. It's got elastic bands. It's got all sorts of stuff in it. And I've actually reduced the amount of stuff I have in it over the years. When I was certified to do X and Y crazy things, I put stuff in it. And when I was no longer certified, I pulled stuff out of it. And I can walk through some of the things that are in it. I'll do that. But I want to offer a comparison that later, once I was no longer an EMT and I wasn't running as a SWAT medic anywhere, this handy dandy little first aid kit came into my life, and this goes hiking and backpacking and camping with me, and we'll go through this too. And the reason I share both of these before I get into it is because it's fundamentally the underlying philosophy that is the same in both of these kits. So we'll go through, and the pouch is a very personal thing. What you like, what works, aesthetically pleasing, size wise, that's entirely a personal decision. It is not about this kit or box or package is inherently better. What matters is that the needs that you've identified in your world for the stuff you need, and how to have the stuff you need when you need it. That's what matters the most. So we'll come back to this. We'll go in order a little bit. The underlying philosophy is work towards 90% with as little maintenance as possible. What you're going to face 90% of the time, and not have to deal with, make it complex, make it overly complex. The first thing I'll say, Brittany, I know you're out in Arizona. If you leave something in the car, it melts and you don't have it anymore. I live in Vermont, and if you leave something in the car in the winter, it freezes, and then it's no longer supposed to be used. So you and I, neither of us should leave sterile saline wash, that little tiny bottle of eye wash in our car, because one half of the year or the other, and it's going to be useless. So unless we're going to bring our first aid kit into the house every time and then carry it back out with us every time, it doesn't do us any good. Simplicity is the thing that makes us most able to be prepared. If it fits into our lives, it integrates into our lives in a way that just works, so that it's not a lot of extra steps. We're all going to just do it a lot more. It's human nature. So you may see on, in a online somewhere, a retailer or whatever, the 137 piece first aid kit, and it's got 1.5 ounces of eye wash. Well, two things. One, I'm going to tell you that 1.5 ounces doesn't wash anything out of your eye. You need, you're going to start with a water bottle. You're going to end at a water fountain. You're going to want a garden hose. So 1.5 ounces of, sterile wash just doesn't do anything. But two, that thing is going to have to move with you. It can't get above 95 degrees or 100 degrees. It can't get below 30 degrees. So you're adding complexity, which is going to reduce the likelihood that you're going to use it. And, let's say you're traveling, I always bring it into my house, but I put it in the car, and then I went on vacation, so I have it. And we went, out to, Maine for the weekend, and I don't bring it in the hotel room with me, and it freezes. What good does that do me? So reducing the complexity is step number one for me. Again, 90% of what you're going to need to treat, you don't need to wash your eyes out for 90% of the problems you have. What are you going to have? You're going to need Band-Aids, plain and simple, or adhesive bandages, because we don't want to brand and get Johnson & Johnson after us on this podcast. And I'll show you that both of these kits have a pile of Band-Aids, a few different sizes. I find that the tiny ones, the little dots, and that's one of the other things to watch for, 137 parts. But if 60 of them are this big and they fall off in 2.5 minutes, put them on a 3-year-old and see what happens. What are you spending your money on? What are you actually doing? So I look at what are the things that I'm going to need that are going to be effective. And that's, I grab some full-size Band-Aids, then I grab some adhesive pads, because that's for a little bit of a bigger cut, and some gauze pads and tape to wrap it up with, or gauze rolls and tape to wrap it up with. And I'll show you my particular kind of favorite tape, and that's just a me thing, but I'll show it to you. You'll also see some things, insect sting stuff. If you're going to do that because insect stings are a problem, okay, fine. But I don't recommend that you put it in your first aid kit. I think if you are concerned about insect stings, you have a little kit, a lot like a person that has a epinephrine kit for an anaphylactic allergic reaction. If you're that concerned about it, it should be a very easy, very portable kit. Don't worry about it. Or, don't have to think about it much. It stays with you. When you go to a soccer game and somebody, runs into the goalpost, or there's a collision between two kids and somebody splits a little bit of skin open, that's a Band-Aid. That's a gauze wrap kind of day. And that's 90% of what you're going to do. Bicycle riding, learning to ride a bike, knowing how to ride a bike, and then falling over anyway. Those things, those are the basics that you want to have. If you're a little bit more advanced, you've taken maybe an American Red Cross first aid course, or some states have a first responder level. I'm not talking to the EMTs. EMTs, they do whatever they want, and rookie EMTs tend to get all the bells and whistles and gadgets and have 5 kinds of scissors and all that, and they can do that if they want. But the folks who just want to be able to take care of what comes across the road, you're going to want some basic bleeding control, and you're going to want some kind of basic survival things, and so that's this bigger kit here. And I'm gonna try not to run over my dog, because we had a thunderstorm, and so she's hiding. Excuse me, Dirk. There we go. She's a little mad that I just moved my chair away, but she'll forgive me. So this kit, and you can clearly see that it's gotten a lot of sun and abuse and all sorts of other things, but this is way bigger than most people need, and it's got all sorts of stuff inside. But we'll start with a couple of basics. One of the first things I love having is a pair of trauma shears. And this can be used to cut anything from gauze to pennies. And Brett, I've even, as a kid, this is literally the pair of scissors I used to cut to cut a penny in front of you. And you used to be so impressed with it. $7, $8, $9, but there's absolutely nothing that these things won't go through. And they're very simple, and they're actually pretty safe to use. They're not like sharp scissors. They actually have little serrated edges. So have a pair of scissors. If somebody breaks an arm or a leg, and to be able to splint it, you need to be able to visualize it. Shirts and pant legs come off, and it'll get ripped up the seam very quickly with this. And I actually know a guy who used to use these to cut through car roofs when he was working at a racetrack. So I highly recommend a pair of trauma shears. There's all sorts of fancy ones on these too. You can get them, they fold, and they have a bottle opener on the back here and whatever, and yada yada. You'll never use it. Just have a pair of scissors that do the job. The next thing is have something to write information down on. If you are if an ambulance is coming, they're going to ask some number of questions. They're going to ask, how did this happen? How long ago did this happen? They're going to ask, what medical history does this person have? What medications do they take? What allergies do they have? If you write down some basic questions, you can hand them this piece of paper and save several minutes off of the time that they're going through those basic questions before they're really able to engage in the treatment. This particular card has a whole bunch of other information, because this is what I used on the rescue squad. But even just having a flipped notebook, we're able to write information down. One of the things that you might ask when you're there, who can we call for you? That notification, whether it's a child and you call their parent, whether it's you call their spouse, whether you call their child and say, hey, we've got your mom or your dad here. That may be an important piece of information. in particularly bad calls, if someone's blood pressure, they're really bleeding and things are getting worse, that question and answer period may be the time that you have before a person loses consciousness. And so in a real emergency, that might be the only chance to get information out of them. Don't ask them questions before you try and stop their bleeding. Stop their bleeding first. But also have in mind that getting information from them is good. So if you have a pad, you need a couple of pens. They're subject to freezing and thawing and being overheated and stuff. So I actually recommend keeping just a couple of number 2 pencils or a couple of mechanical pencils in your kit, so that pencils work no matter how cold it is, no matter how hot it is, pencils work. So do that as well. The other front pouch here, I'm just going to tell you, after 25 years in emergency medicine and 30, however many, I'm not going to answer, in public safety in general, I have rubber gloves or non-latex nitrile gloves literally in the vest pocket that I wear in my day-to-day. I have an office job and I still have gloves in my pocket, because there's a couple of very basic rules in emergency medicine. And the first one is, if it's wet and sticky and it's not yours, don't touch it. So have some gloves with you.
Make sure a question about that, actually. Somebody asked about the color of gloves.
Yeah.
I know that on a podcast episode, I was talking to somebody and they said not to wear black gloves because then you can't see what it is that you might be touching. What's your viewpoint on the color of gloves? Does it matter? Does it care, like brand wise? Does it matter?
Yeah, that's about the only thing that matters. And that's true, that if you're wearing, and I remember when I started, all gloves were latex gloves, so they all were the same basic white color. And then nitrile gloves started coming out, and they were in purple and they were in green. Then when the black gloves came out, all the cops were like, black gloves, black is tactical, and we had to have black gloves. And that's when we realized you couldn't see blood on them. So the real lesson there is contrast. Blood is a dark color. If you have dark colored gloves, you're not going to have good contrast. If you have light colored gloves, you'll have good contrast. Now, blood isn't the only body fluid. So, somebody vomits and some part of it's clear, you're still not going to see that very well because it's kind of clear and whatever. So the first rule is still, if it's wet and sticky and not yours, don't touch it. But for the type of gloves, now I'll say that, people being worried about, doing a blind sweep for blood and then checking in a low light environment, that's a person who's practicing tactical medicine. Like, that's somebody that's very specialized. We're talking about being, at the soccer field, at the baseball field. I took a tennis racket to the face when I was a kid, falling down, scraping your knee, daylight stuff, having it in the car, but an emergency happens in the home and you run out to the car and grab it, but you have lighting in the home. Most of those times, gloves just protect you, and that's what matters most. But yes, if you want to be purist, yeah, black gloves, very, very dark purple gloves, don't bother with that. Beyond that, the colors don't indicate anything particular about the glove. They don't. Almost nothing is actual natural latex anymore because of the latex allergy. Almost everything you can get is going to be a nitrile or variation of a nitrile. They're all non-allergenic. Purple, green, long cuffed, short cuffed, double X, they're all just the same thing, basically. If you're getting a medical grade exam glove, you're going to be fine. You'll notice, so the next thing I have, and the other thing is I set my kit up in a particular way. And again, I can't hold it quite right to show everybody, but my very basic information with my cards, I have another type of notepad here because this is another way that our squad used to keep track of information, was in an even simpler form than the card I showed you before. So I have that here. I have my gloves because they're the very first thing I'm going to want. And actually, this particular kit, if I have the lid shut and the buckled, I can still get to my glove pouch. That's kind of a little. I can start with the gloves before I start with anything else. But moving back into the kit, the next thing I end up with is a lot of bandages, and these are band-aids of small sizes, big sizes. This is one of those kind of like they say like knee ones where it's folded over inside. It's really twice as big as that. You'll notice that I don't have any of those little tiny finger ones or the dot ones or the ones they give you after a shot or anything like that, because nothing I'm going to worry about dressing for a wound is going to be the size of getting a needle injection at the doctor's office. Well, we'll just clean you up. I no longer, now that I'm not certified to start IVs anymore, I don't carry alcohol wipes. Alcohol on an open wound, that just hurts like heck. So there's not really a lot of reason to do that. And if you're able to wash it, you should wash it with running water and soap around the wound and cleanse it before you dress it. So there's really no need to put an antiseptic in something like this. And it's okay to put a Band-Aid on and stop the bleeding for a little bit. And then, in an hour, when you have a chance to get to a bathroom, take it off and wash it out then. The world is not going to collapse. Infection is not that likely to start within just a few minutes. So, if you pick somebody up, you knock what you can see for dirt off, you dress them up, and then they know to go clean it in a little bit, then it's going to be okay. And again, alcohol, hydrogen peroxide, any of those things, they have expiration dates. They're sensitive to heat and cold. They make it more complex to have a kit in your car. The one exception I'll offer, you might choose, and this might not have anything to do with first aid. This might be a COVID thing these days, to have a bottle of alcohol-based hand sanitizer in your kit. Not a bad idea. There's enough of this around. It's still free in so many places. So grab a bottle, throw it in. If it dries out, throw it away, grab another bottle and throw it in. Nothing wrong with this, but this is for you when you take the gloves off and you're not able to wash your hand. This is not for cleaning a wound. This is just for afterwards. A little further back in here, I have some bigger dressings. People fall down and scrape their knees or get bigger cuts. So these are just bigger pads. If you're worried about something this size, you're also going to need some Curlex or gauze wrap. So make sure that you know that this goes with something like this, where you have a 2 or 3 inch wide roll. This is I think this is 3 inch. This is 4 inch. So you want it big enough that it's going to cover the wound and the gauze pad and whatever else you're using, and wrap it all the way around. It's okay if it looks like it's excessive, either cut it off, you've got the scissors, or wrap it all the way around, because you can't save the rest of it anyway, so why not just use it all? But that helps protect a wound, and if you need to dress something up, it's going to take more than, maybe more than one. So this is a Ziploc bag that has 3 more rolls of that kind of Curlex in there. Helps you be able to wrap those up. That brings us to my favorite type of tape. This is, the brand is usually Curasilk. This is a type of a cloth tape that is very, very effective and very adhesive. It does kind of suck if you have really hairy arms or body parts and you put this on and then you got to peel it off. But the trick to that, when you're taking it off, because taking a bandage off is not an emergency, take the bandage off and use alcohol when you're doing that. The alcohol will dissolve the adhesive. So it's a little easier to get this off if you're using alcohol. There's other kinds of tape like paper tape. Some people have allergies to certain kinds of tape. And some people are allergic to paper tape. Some people are allergic to plastic tape. Usually it's the adhesive. I'll say two things. One, if they're bleeding in a big bad way, dying is worse than being allergic to the tape they put on your skin. So somewhere along the line, you just do business. And two, as a civilian trying to help someone, you're considered a good Samaritan. And in every state in the country, a good Samaritan can't be sued for acting in good faith. They can't be held liable for harm caused when you're acting in good faith. So if you wrap someone up with curacao tape and it hurts like hell and they rip a whole bunch of hair off when they're done with the bandage, they can't come back and sue you for causing them pain. You are trying to help. So this is a highly effective and highly durable type of tape. Now, a person that's sweating a lot, this can be challenging. So what you might need to do is wrap it all the way around so the tape is sticking to itself. But it's still my favorite kind of tape. I cannot possibly tell you how many rolls of this stuff I've gone through in my career. Another handy piece, this is a little bit longer term, so not quite as likely, but if you're camping, I'll recommend they have a couple of triangular bandages or cravats. With just a little bit of understanding, you can learn how to tie a triangular bandage so that it goes around the back of the neck, and you can make an arm sling so that you can immobilize somebody who either injured their wrist, their forearm, their elbow, their upper arm, or their shoulder. All that whole section of the body can be immobilized by one cravat that's tied a knot behind the back and turned in back of the neck and turned into a sling. And if the person's going to have to like walk out on their own, you get a second one and you tie it as a swath across the body so that it holds that in place, and that will really limit motion. So if you're going to be out and about and hiking or camping, I'd offer that a cravat is a good idea as well. And then one other kind of survival thing, but it's often overlooked, is an emergency blanket. And a person that is suffering from blood loss can have go into what's called hypovolemic shock, and their body temperature starts dropping, as well as all of the other things going on, because their body doesn't have enough blood to circulate around to make all the organs get everything they need. So, and especially if you're up here by me in the Northeast and you come across like a car accident or, a hunting accident or something like that, using one of these emergency blankets where it has a shiny foil side and that goes toward the patient, it can help keep them from suffering from hypothermia on top of all the other problems they have. So not a bad idea. The other point with this is, if your car's ever disabled, you're stuck on the side of the road for a while. And in I think it was last year, I don't remember, it was in 2000, it was December of 2021, I-95 between DC and Virginia became a parking lot because of a freak winter storm, and cars were stuck for more than 24 hours. And a car, a regular internal combustion engine car, you can only run it for so long before you start getting carbon monoxide and exhaust into the car. So people had to turn their car off, or they're running low on gas and had to turn their car off, and then they're freezing cold. This doesn't require some wild and crazy shock or trauma to be useful. You could just simply be cold and unwrap this and help keep yourself warm. So kind of a handy little tidbit there. There are certainly bigger bandages, burn sheets, abdominal pads. There are tools for taking blood pressure, or stethoscopes for listening to breath sounds, and also for taking blood pressures, but only if you're trained, only if you practice them regularly so that you're good at it. Because getting a blood pressure wrong can be a life-threatening misdiagnosis or piece of misinformation. So if you're going to be trained and you're going to practice them regularly, and I promise you this, taking a blood pressure in the back of a moving ambulance 65 miles an hour down the interstate is way, way different than sitting in the doctor's office or sitting in a patient lab learning how to take a blood pressure. So with cars driving by and sirens approaching the scene and babies crying and people yelling from the side of the road, if you're not practicing to take blood pressure and pulse and things like that in those environments, then you pose a potential risk. So stick with what you know, stick with the basics. If you're going to learn that and you're going to invest in the time and training to do that, fantastic. But don't get the tool and think this will be great. That's where somebody can be dangerous. And the digital or electronic ones that are battery operated, they're much better these days, but they might, be a little less accurate, depending, particularly in situations where a person is very excited, is in compensated shock, meaning their body is they're losing blood, but their body is compensating by increasing the pulse and increasing the blood pressure, and they're going through this shock state. The digital tools can be fooled because they're not really all that smart. So stick with what you know, stick with what you're trying to do on those kinds of tools. It looks cool when we're walking around with stethoscopes around our neck and stuff, but you gotta know what you're doing. So questions on the big kit. I used to have oral airways. I used to have nasal airways, not stuff that you need if you're if you're just a person worried about first aid.
And Janice, do you have any questions about the big kit?
No, no questions, but this is all great information, Doug. Thank you.
No
I'm
problem.
taking so many notes.
And the one other thing I'll share, and this may not be a bad idea for just the life we're living. I do keep, this is called a Sharps shuttle. This is a plastic tube that is open on this end, and you can put a needle into this, and then you just clip the cap on, and your needle is now safe so that you can't get poked with it. And this, part of the reason we need these in the world, I used to use it because as an EMTI, I was starting IVs as a medical intervention. But sometimes we just find these things on the side of the road. We find these things out behind the shed at the school, and we don't want our kids tripping and falling or sticking themselves on it, or taking a slide in a baseball game or a soccer game and getting stabbed with it. So I'll say that this happens to fit inside my kit very nicely, and because I was on a rescue squad when I got it, it didn't cost me anything because I grabbed it out of the equipment locker and just threw it in my bag. But something else like a detergent bottle, if you have an empty laundry detergent bottle and you just put one in your car, and you come across something and you can scoop it up, just scoop it up so you never actually have to touch any part of it. Shake it down so it's in there. This heavy gauge plastic will keep you from getting poked with a syringe. And with the amount of heroin and drugs that are out there, and people that are using them are not entirely the most environmentally conscious class of people as a whole, not saying anything about anyone individually, we don't want these things lying around. They're a health concern, they're a safety concern. So I do think you keep one of these or something that's a heavy gauge plastic in order to keep that from being a risk. And the reality is even a soda bottle would work. So, just keep an empty 16-ounce soda bottle in the car for that particular purpose. It would work. If you couldn't quite shimmy it in by getting it in the neck, as long as you go slow and you're methodical and you pick it up by the other end, by the non-sharp end, and don't hold both. Only hold one or the other. If you pick up the needle, leave the bottle on the ground and put it into the bottle, or leave the bottle standing up and put it into the bottle. If you're going to use the bottle, then don't touch the needle do that. Because what happens if we have both the needle and the bottle and we do this and we miss, bad things happen. But I do offer that as a good idea. Okay, so this is my little kit now. I carried this as a police officer once I was no longer a certified EMT. This was one of several kits that I carried when I was a SWAT medic. And now I carry this hiking. I've modified it a little bit, taken some of the some of the big stuff out. But you'll notice step one, I have my little trauma shears. This type of pack is kind of interesting. This is called Molly, and I know that my lighting isn't great, but you can kind of see here, this is a horizontal strap, and it's got a line right here that it's stitched, a line right here that it's stitched. And there's 2 rows of it, and there's 3 rows of it. And what that means is that I can attach something else that's also made for Molly because it's got straps like this. And I can build as many little backpacks and kits and off of this as I want. MOLLE is the name of the Molly gear. And that's makes it highly flexible. So if you get a backpack and it's a Molly gear backpack, you can just get any kind of a kit like this or water bottles or anything else, and they just strap on with a couple of snaps and life is good. So just a little bit of a side note. In here, you're gonna see that basically all the same stuff in principle that I talked about before, just in a smaller kit. The first thing you see is a couple of big cravats, and right behind them, my gloves. They're never far from me. And so if I only open this a little bit, the first thing I can do when I reach in is I can get a hold of my gloves. That is one rule I do live by. So I've got some gloves, I've got some cravats, and back here, just because the space where it happens to line up, I've got a couple of larger. This is an abdominal pad. It's a 5x9, just a little bit of a trauma dressing. Happens to fit. Down here, I've got that Curlex or that rolled gauze. I've got Band-Aids, and again, just the big chunky Band-Aids. That's what has enough grip surface to stay on. That's all I want, something useful. Pretty, that comes later. And then some gauze 4x4 pads, the same kind of pads I showed you before. The nice thing about 4x4, if they're too big, you fold them in half. If they're not big enough, you lay 2 of them on. If 2 of them isn't big enough, the ambulance probably needs to be on the way. I've got my Curlex or my Curacao tape. This happens to be a roll of 2-inch. And the other thing that I haven't talked about so far is right here. And this is a tourniquet. And I wanted to spend a couple minutes on this. In severe trauma issues or situations, and as a tactical medic and as a practicing EMTI, the lessons we were learning out of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were that 67% of all preventable battlefield deaths were due to extremity blood loss. So somebody was shot in the arm was damaged in explosion, leg was damaged, leg was shot, and a blood vessel was damaged. And if it had been treated by stopping the blood loss, the wound could have been survivable. But because they didn't have the technology and the training, people died from that. And so it was considered a preventable battlefield death. There are 3 primary categories. 67% was external hemorrhage, and the other 2 categories were sucking chest wound, meaning there's a hole in the chest and air was leaking into the lung and that collapsed the lung and pushed them sideways. And the third had to do with the airway and damage to the airway. Those other two can only be treated by an advanced, certified and trained person. But anybody can stop bleeding. And the first thing to do with bleeding is direct pressure. Whatever, wherever, whenever. If something is bleeding, put something on it to stop the bleeding. If you have the time, start by getting a clean cloth or a clean bandage and put that on the dressing, or put that dressing on the wound. If that soaks through, add more on top of it. Never take off that bandage, because some level of clotting is happening as the blood sticks to that gauze pad and sticks in that area. And if you start pulling it off to replace it with a fresh one, you tear that clot off and it starts bleeding all over again. So put dressing on it, put more dressing on it, put more dressing on it. Get to the point where you wrap it tight if it's still bleeding. Use that Curlex, that rolled gauze, and wrap it. And if you need to, you wrap it nice and tight. If a blood vessel is involved, your artery is right here. On the inside here, you've got brachial artery. You've got some veins. If you've ever had to have a blood draw at the lab, you've got what's called your antecubital vein. There's probably one here, and there's probably one about here. If those are involved, those are significant vessels, and they can bleed quite a bit. It takes a lot of pressure and a lot of dressing to stop the bleeding there. If those things don't work, or if the wound is too damaged because there's a partial amputation, hunters have with gunshots, people working with chainsaws and the chain kicks back, things like that cause harm and cause significant damage. So it's a good idea to have something like a tourniquet available. There are several different kinds. This is the only one that I have with me tonight. This one is a strap. It's just got a couple rubber bands on it. And when you take the rubber bands off, it opens up to a strap that goes, the arm just goes through, and then you grab the strap and you shorten it so that this is tight against the skin. And then you use this to twist, to tighten it, and you're turning the blood vessel off as you tighten it. Hurts like heck. Not gonna lie about that. But a lot of pain from the tourniquet, better than a lot of dying from the blood loss. So this is they're very, very simple. You can get them. I want you to make sure that you're getting a good one, not a $2 or $3 one that's all made of plastic. The last thing you want in this moment is for this to be made of a cheap plastic and to break when you put too much stress on it. Pay $10 or $12 for a tourniquet, but have one at least so that you can take care of a wound should something happen. The other kind that is also pretty good is basically, it's like a rubber, like a bike tube. It's just flat rubber, and you can, it folds very flat. It's very easy. They're a little less expensive. And if you wrap it really, really tightly around, or if you create a loop with it, meaning they're usually about, they're probably about, I think they're 4 or 5 feet long. So if you fold it in half and you reach through the loop and you pull the strands out and then just pull it tight, 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 you can have the same effect with a tourniquet. A little less expensive and very simple to use. And anything that significantly slows down or stops blood flow in like an amputation or a severe emergency, severe injury where the blood vessel, major blood vessels involved, you're saving lives. Tourniquets can be on for hours and hours and hours. It used to be, oh, you absolute last resort, life-saving only. You have to 6 hours. You have to. Nope. They figured this out in unfortunately, way too many real-life cases in battlefields. Hours and hours and hours tourniquets can be on. If that's what you believe is necessary to save a person's life, put one on. So that And what you'll notice is that I've covered all the small stuff. We talked about skinned knees from learning to ride a bike, all the way to stuff you might see if you come across a really horrible car accident, or even shooting events. And really, it's only the same kind of basic things. First aid is very, meatball. It's just get bleeding stopped, just get people picked up and put back together. And if it was bad enough that that's not good enough, then you should be calling an ambulance or going to the hospital anyway. A first aid course will talk about how to splint, and to do more than just what I offered with the cravat. But if you take a first aid course and then you want to get like a SAM splint, which is a very flexible foil kind of splint, you can do that. If you take a first aid course, you might hear about seizures. Great, learn how to take care of seizures, but there's absolutely no piece of equipment that you need to be able to treat a person with a seizure. Seizures, the only thing you do is you roll them up. First off, you leave them alone and let them, so that they make sure just that they don't fall or hit something while they're seizing. And then once they're no longer actively seizing, you put them on their side in what's called the recovery position, so that they don't vomit and aspirate on their own body fluids. And the same is true if a person is overly intoxicated, not decreased level of consciousness from a heroin overdose, a seizure, whatever. Put them up on one side or the other. It doesn't matter unless there's trauma. In which case, don't put the injured side. Don't have them roll over onto their broken arm or whatever. But that's really the only thing you do for stuff like that. Medical treatment is, if they're having a medical emergency that's not injury related, you probably ought to be calling the ambulance. Even if the ambulance says, "Hey, we assessed you and we don't think you need to go to the hospital," they're still the people to evaluate the situation and say, "This is what we think." So much better off having never try and guess with chest pain. Only with shortness of breath, some folks will have like a chronic condition and can say, "I'm clearly inside the bounds of my chronic condition of asthma or something. I'm okay." That's okay. But if they go, "I've never felt like this before," what, call the ambulance. And if they don't need it, they just pack up and go home. That's okay. But there's really no supplies that go for something like that you need for something like that. First aid kits are about trauma. And with what I've offered, you can get 90% of what you're going to come across. You can have it even just in the little kit, this size, and then just have a few extra supplies at home so you can restock when you come home from soccer.
That was great. Janice, do you have any questions? I have, I think, 3 questions that other people asked that you didn't cover. Everything else is covered, but Janice, I want to give you the opportunity first.
Thank you. No questions here.
Okay. So somebody asked, where should I go to learn first aid? I want to do it right. And I thought that was a great question. Do you have any like national sites that you prefer, that you think are more legit than others, that we should be aware of or have on our radar?
The 2 big ones that I know of, the American Red Cross, and they are a national organization. The American Red Cross is actually one of the only organization that has a federal mandate to provide the services that it does. That's around sheltering during disasters. But they're a very well established and reputed organization. So if you find a Red Cross first aid course, the very, very, very first thing I ever did related to first aid officially was take an American Red Cross babysitters course when I was 13. And they also teach CPR and AED use. So the first thing I say is American Red Cross, CPR and AED use. And I do, by the way, I do have a CPR mask, but I chose not to show that and talk about it much because currently the standards with doing CPR or cardiopulmonary resuscitation don't require lay people, untrained non-medical responders, to provide artificial respirations. It's enough to do compressions, and if you have an AED, to use the AED until licensed medical responders arrive. So I didn't bother pulling out the face mask. I've seen them misused by civilians probably more than I've seen them used properly. So in that moment, I'd rather people know just to not mess with respirations. But Red Cross for first aid courses, and American Heart Association also for CPR courses. And then the third place that comes to mind is there's I want to say it's the Green Cross. There's actually a first aid specific national training group, and I know at least their symbol is a green little plus sign, little green cross. And they are and they offer not only, if I remember correctly, not only personal first aid, but also some workplace first aid, maybe some industrial stuff. So those are three places: American Red Cross and the Green Cross for first aid, American Red Cross and American Heart Association for CPR.
Awesome. Yeah, I did just look it up and it's greencross.org. So yeah. Okay, the next question was, if I never use my kit, how often should I look at it or go through it? I don't think anything that you pointed out really has like an expiration date on it. It's, you kind of told us to stay away from like the eye drops and all that kind of stuff, but how often should we look through our kit, especially if we never have to use it?
So yeah, and that's a really valid question. There's a couple things with it. And I'm gonna offer that, and I'm gonna tell you that I might not be proud of this, but some of these, if I were to show you in good light, are probably old enough and yellowed enough to make you wonder a little bit. And what I'm offering with that is saying that this when it's packaged and new is a sterile bandage. At some point, if this is old enough and yellow enough, even if it stayed dry, if it gets wet, then it's got to go. Because if it gets wet, it can get moldy. But if it stays dry, but gets old enough and yellow enough, it might not be sterile entirely perfectly. Not the biggest problem that a person that just gouged their knee is going to have for a few minutes, especially if they're going to go home and they're going to clean it properly, and then they're going to dress it with a fresh bandage. So these dry materials can be pretty forgiving. Now, with that, I'll say that if we never use it, and I quote that because we might use it and forget, I was just, I just grabbed a Band-Aid out of it. And I gave them a couple extras in case their kid, falls down again. We should check it every 6 months at an absolute minimum each year. But I would offer that if every time you set your clock back, you change the battery in your smoke detector, and you look and do a quick inventory of your first aid kit. So every time you set the clock back or forward, you check your smoke detector and you check your first aid kit. It makes it very simple to know, oh, that's right. I gave my friend the last 3 Band-Aids I have when their kid fell down, and I totally spaced it because we were having such a good time. I need to restock on Band-Aids. So I would offer that it's just a good habit to be in. You don't need to take stuff out of what I've recommended. You don't need to take stuff out and get rid of it unless you recognize that it's just not in good condition anymore. That elastic or rubber tourniquet that I talked about, in 8 or 10 years in Arizona heat, might be complete garbage, and you got to replace it. Maybe you replace it every 3 years, but you should check that 1 to 2 times a year so that you know.
That's great. Okay, I lied. I actually have 2 more questions and then I'm done with my little sticky note I pulled off of Instagram DM. So the second to last question that I have is, where should I keep my kit? I know you mentioned earlier the car, but maybe not the car, depending on weather. But like, where are some good places to keep your kit just for the average person?
Absolutely. And the first thing I'm going to say is keep a kit in the place you're most likely to use it. So there should be a kit in the home. Doesn't have to be, like these little go bags kinds of things. It can be, even one of those little kind of tackle box looking plastic things. Again, don't buy the 137 piece thing. Buy a box that will put the stuff that you want in it. Or at home, since you have a medicine cabinet, just have a stock of the things that you're going to use. I personally keep this in the car with me, and I've designed it so that it can sit in the car and it's fine. It's not gonna, nothing's bad gonna happen. I'm gonna look in on it every so often. I'm gonna make sure it's okay. Other than that, it sits in the car. If you're an avid hiker or outdoors person, you might have, as I do, a separate little kit that is very convenient for that particular environment. But the most important thing is to have a kit where you're most likely going to use it. And again, taking something with you. Oh, I put it here every time I come into the house, and then I put it here. I move it and I go out to the car, and then I move it and I move it. That adds complexity to the process of having it with you. And when you make a situation more complex, you make it less likely that you're going to follow through with it. So even in Arizona, you can design a kit that maybe it's in the trunk so that it doesn't get direct sunlight. Or if you have an SUV where it's open, maybe you keep it in the footwell in the behind the driver or passenger seat so that it doesn't get direct sunlight, and and you do all the other things to to make sure your car doesn't overheat in the craziness that you people live in down there.
I have a follow-up to that because in Arizona we have rattlesnakes and other dangerous things, and we have dogs, so we always keep Benadryl in our kit. And I'm trying to think. I think everything else would be fine in the car, but would Benadryl be okay in the car in the heat?
It's going to be
Probably not,
sensitive to
huh?
temperature. So
Okay.
that's that little pouch. That's a waste pouch that goes with you, like a person who has to worry about a peanut allergy. That's that's a pocketbook thing, or a little fanny pack thing or something like that.
All right, and then the last question that I have written down from somebody else, I promise, the last one is my kids are 3 and 1 right now, but when should I start introducing them to first aid? How should I have that conversation? Basically, like how to get their kids involved, I guess, so that they know, like, I guess if they get hurt, maybe their kid can help. I don't know, but yeah, I guess how do you get your kids involved with first aid?
So yeah, absolutely. So kids are sponges, and they're absolutely learning from everything that's going on around them. So your kid is going to fall, your kid is going to bump, your kid is going to scrape, your kid is going to something, and they're going to learn from your reaction how they should react in a situation. So a person that reacts with the oh my God, are you okay? The this, or that, and makes a big deal out of it. The expectation from the child is this is a big deal. When that happens and you go, wow, guess we'll have to fix that. And you pick them up and you dust them off. They're going to learn that what happens is you pick them up and dust them off. And you can engage them as part of the process. This can be scary. Absolutely. Do you want to help clean this? Do you want to help clean your boo-boo? It's okay. Look, this is soft. You can touch it. See, you take it and you touch it, and it's okay. And you can also, and this is often really tough for parents, if you get scraped, you can offer your kid a chance to participate in your care. So I wasn't good at this. I'm tough. I'm and I'm bleeding and I'm whatevering but if I were to stop and say, yep, I got cut, and just like I taught you when I bandaged your knee, I now need to bandage mine. Do you want to take a minute to clean this with me? That's fine. And then teach them, let's put on gloves. They're going to be huge and you're going to look like you're wearing dad's shoes. It's okay. But you can teach them by modeling that and allowing them to engage in that care. there's going to be a time and a place, the other sibling, and it's a wound that kind of makes you look scary. You're not going to let your 3-year-old dress it, but you certainly can, because there's going to be plenty of opportunities along the way to model that behavior positively.
Awesome. Well, I don't have anything else. Janice, I know I've already asked you 4 times, but if you have anything else to add, feel free. Otherwise, thank you, Doug. This was
Janice,
great.
you're making it too easy on me. Come on.
Oh, I do what I can.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording. And Janice, I hope you got something out of this. I know I did. And Doug, thank you so much.